Hello, welcome to Focus on Fantasy Romance, episode number 53, a podcast where we discuss books, genre, industry, and our geeky lives. I'm your host, Elle Klaus.
I'm ARD Clerk.
Hi, unmute yourself, Paulina.
I'm Paulina.
Ishabelle is waving.
Electra.
And today we have J.M Butler.
Hello.
And J.M Butler writes fantasy romance. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I write fantasy romance. I'm an attorney and I run a law firm with my husband. And I've been writing for several years now, and I found that it's a fantastic excuse for getting to try out new things. You know, you go and you meet people and you ask them, hey, can you show me how to do that? It's for a story, and they're more likely to open up and talk to you. And it's a great explanation for why you get random talents like lock picking and knife throwing and stuff like that. So, yeah. And so, then, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask, you're probably on the NSA's like monitor list.
Probably.
Weird Google searches.
I'm pretty sure that that's happened. I invested in a VPN a little too late. So, you know, all of that research for how do you kill people in creative ways, you know, Google searches like that probably get you put on that list.
Probably. So you write a series called the Tue-Rah series? Is that
Tue-Rah Chronicles? Yes, that's what I'm in process of releasing, with a whole bunch of unrelated stories and then some connected novellas. I like writing lots of stories, and focus isn't my strong point, I suppose.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Chronicles then?
Yeah, so when I was a little girl, I fell in love with fantasy. Specifically, The Hobbit was the first one that really got me excited about fantasy, but none of the fantasy books that I read had women as protagonists. In fact, some of them didn't have women at all, except, you know, odd serving people. And so I wanted to do a story about a woman, and I wanted to have everything I loved in fantasy. So dragons and shapeshifters and interdimensional portals and fights. Of course, you have to have your battles, and you have to have monsters and chimeras and such like that. And I then wanted it to be, I knew I wanted it to have a romance, but that I didn't want her to be just this damsel. So Tue-Rah Chronicles is a story that grew up with me, and that I've been working on and adapting for years, trying to actually get into this workable series. And so now it's this massive story. It's over 3 million words that I'm getting edited and sent out into the world. So the final blurb of it is that my heroine, Amelia, it's what would you do if you prepared for the wrong destiny? It's about this young woman who has prepared all of her life to defeat this enemy. She's had to endure a great deal, and she finally gets brought back into the battle and learns she's outmatched, she's outgunned, and she did not get ready for the right destiny, and she has to learn how to adapt while also having to deal with a very complicated relationship or two that shows up.
Or two? Is there a love triangle?
Well, I could say there's a love triangle, but I think people would be really disappointed if I said it's one, because that would suggest that there's equal interest. It's more like if you have a love, sort of shape, and one of them falls away. But there's heartbreak.
Oh, yeah. Well, that happens in love stories sometimes.
Yep. So it's, because I don't want to give a spoiler, the tension, I like working with stories where you have people who really have no business being together and trying to make it work. And that was part of what I wanted to connect, because particularly in history, you had a lot of powerful women who would wind up in relationships that I'm sure they had no desire for whatsoever, and yet they had to find a way to make it work. And so there is romance in it, but love as a feeling is not as important in the decisions as I'm a leader. I have to do what's best for the people I'm representing and to resolve this issue. So that's kind of intention there. Of course, there are emotions, but it's not quite as affectionate as what I think most people would expect if I told them there's a love triangle and such like that.
Okay. So you had mentioned earlier that you're a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that your day job as a lawyer has affected your stories, like the content of your stories?
Yes, I often have to be careful of falling into legalese and over explaining things like, well, we now over here and in the world building, like I have a complete legal system here for shapeshifter law. We don't need to know all these details. And unfortunately, with law, it's kind of like ripping aside two different personality types. Law is very calculating and it's incredibly cold and precise and repetitive. And over here on the writing, it's flowing and it's musical and it's you're pouring out your soul, and you don't repeat words unless you have an incredibly important reason. So those two are in tension a good bit, but it does help me with my research skills, and I'm trying to find that way of blending precision with elegance and prose.
Okay, so with fantasy, my appeal for writing fantasy is I could just make up most of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned that your attorney background helps you with research. So what sort of things do you research when you're writing in a genre where you can literally make up anything?
Well, you're right. I love the fact that I can make my own world because I'm always right. I think that's fantastic. I get to be the expert. But I also see. So Tue-Rah Chronicles. It starts off as high fantasy, but the series is eventually going to become science fiction fantasy because it involves multiple worlds. And so I try to make sure that I have some scientific basis for some of what I'm discussing in the story. And so that way I can build on my world building. Like, for instance, my Vautrians are shapeshifters. And one of the elements with them is that they are biologically monogamous. And so I was doing research for how would that come about? What would that look like in nature? What are the consequences of it? And of course, I had to put it in there because they're shapeshifters who have an incredibly long lifespan, and they're going to overpopulate all of the worlds if I don't find a way to stop them from doing that. So research for that, and like the how can I have fantasy races with all of these special abilities without creating the typical half-breed, quarter-breed, which you usually run into, and so you create these hyper super-powered half mind reader, half shapeshifter type beings. So I was researching just stuff like what can I put in the DNA that would potentially limit that to keep it from so that I could have racial diversity among my characters' appearances, but limit maybe the abilities themselves, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense, because you wouldn't want one race to vastly overpower another one if you want them to live in harmony.
Mm-hmm.
Or relative harmony.
Yeah, we have a lot of war, unfortunately, and they're still overpopulating to an extent, but this has kept them from just give them 200 years and they're going to fill the galaxy on there. Like, this is a problem.
Oh, so that was my questions. I'm going to hand it over to Amy.
Okay, so my questions are a little bit more influence-based, I suppose, and I'm going to ask you more about what you're like as a reader.
Ooh.
So who are your influences and how did they mold you?
Well, the earliest influences that I had were a lot of old classic literature. So my grandfather was having me read Shakespeare because, like, you have to read these before you can read any of these other books because this is where it started. And I was having a hard time with that because they're not the easiest works to get through, but it did make an impression on me. And then absolutely Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Octavia Butler, all had, and some of those are not that old of writers, obviously, but they had a big impact on me as a reader, as a person, and as a writer. And then a lot of mythology, but that didn't change as much who I was as, like, wow, they really didn't care about constraints. I mean, literally, the man just had children out of his feet. Talk about imagination.
So let's talk about if you could choose any author, alive or dead, to meet for tea and talk about writing and books, who would you choose?
Well, I'd probably pick Tolkien because I have a lot of questions for him, and I'm hoping maybe he could help me untangle some of the languages I tried writing when I was mimicking his style, and I sort of got them very badly tangled up, but mainly because he was the first one that his story took me into this whole different world, and it was it was one of those unforgettable experiences, like your first time in a story, and like, I forgot life on this planet. I was not here, and suddenly you have to come back. So that's who I'd want to talk to. And I'd have to hug him. I don't know if he'd be happy about being hugged, but I'd want to hug him.
That's one thing I've always thought about, because I thought, you really haven't made it as a fantasy writer until you create a massive, epic creation story for your fantasy world with, right down to the nitty-gritty of this god and this angel and this fallen, and the Silmarillion, all the way down to, the epic poetry style of it. And people read it and they're like, this is literally beyond insane. Like, you're not a fantasy writer until you know how your world got created, like down to the stone. Because he knew, I think he knew that world better than he knew the world he actually lived in. Oh, I'm sure.
And I love reading over it and seeing his imagination. And when I was wanting to become an author, at first I just wanted to write fan fiction, pretty much. And my father told me, he's like, no, if you really want to honor what Tolkien did, you're going to sit down and you're going to make your own. Not that there's anything wrong with fan fiction, but if you really are wanting to honor that and create your own and contribute, you need to learn how to do this from the ground up. And it was very inspiring.
Yes. And I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan. I adore Chronicles of Narnia. So. Yeah, that was one of the first presents my husband ever bought me, actually, was the Chronicles of Narnia box set. No, we're nerds, but it's okay. That's why we've been together for so long, because we're both nerds.
It's a good gift.
Yeah, well, he got the Necronomicon for Christmas last year, so we have a thing about books. But so look back on your writing career and tell us 3 things you wish you'd done differently.
Well, probably one of the first things I would have done differently, if I could go back, I'd grab myself by the shoulders and tell myself, everybody's scared. You need to do it anyway. I started trying to freelance. I opened a freelance business when I was 14 and started sending out stories all over. But there were multiple opportunities that I decided ahead of time they weren't for me, that it was going to be too difficult, out of my ability, and I never gave myself the chance to compete. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be to really get involved in the indie writer movement instead of waiting so long and trying to find a path in traditional publishing. I know that for some people that has been their road, but I don't write to market particularly well. My stories tend to be a little bit odd, and I like to explore relationships in ways that are not necessarily I suppose, satisfying to traditional publishing houses. So I just wish that I had done that sooner. And the third thing, let's see, if I could fix any of my mistakes, I guess I would go back and I would be careful with some of the relationships that I formed, particularly with mentors, and not always recognizing when people were when they didn't have my best interests at heart, and not being particularly good at discerning what their actual intents were.
Makes sense to me. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you as a reader. When you buy a book, what do you look for to capture your interest immediately? Do you look at the cover? Do you read the blurb? Or are there certain tropes that you just have to have?
Well, personally, I'm fine with almost any trope. There's some that make me a little bit cautious, and I always see that cover first, but I have to turn to the blurb, and I read the blurb, and I'm looking to see, does it say, what else do I need to know? Do I have to know more of what's happening here? Sometimes, though, it'll snag me if it just is like beautifully written. You know, there's a pretty turn of phrase. Like I remember this one book, it was called Three Gems of Starlight, and it said something along the lines of with oh, iridescent as pearls, and I'm like, oh, well, this sounds beautiful. I'm going to take this book and read it. And the book was it was an interesting story, and it was an early indie book that I ended up picking up. So yeah, that was it's usually the blurb for me. Cover can be really bad, and I'll still buy it as long as there's something exciting in the blurb or something that connects to me.
Very cool. All right, Paulina, it's your turn.
Hi, Paulina.
You do need to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, that was fun. So I was looking, you have a mermaid story out, and I was like, ooh, it's my favorite mermaid. It's my favorite mermaid story ever. Because, you know, anyway, that's my second question. So my first question is, what is your favorite Disney tale or Grimm tale?
Okay, well, my favorite Disney tale is The Jungle Book. That is my favorite story. It's not a true fairy tale, but that's the one that
Disney
I watch.
tale.
Yeah, I watch Jungle Book over and over. It's like the songs can still make me happy. And like, oh, I can't be upset listening to that. For Grimm, it would probably be the 12 Dancing Princesses or Bluebeard, both of which are a lot of fun. But Bluebeard in particular, it's very dark.
Yeah. All the Grimm stories are pretty dark.
They are. But a lot more people die in Bluebeard than in the 12 Dancing Princesses. There's a room of dead bodies.
But they were cute. No, they weren't even cute dead bodies. Never mind. So, leading from that one, this is why I was like, hold on, this is another one. Who's your favorite villain? Like, Disney villain. Like,
Okay.
seriously.
Disney villain would be Scar.
Why?
The reason I like Scar is, first of all, he actually succeeded in his villainous plans. He not only had the ambition and the drive and a great song, but he actually followed through and made me very sad. And he achieved, you know, because a lot of times villains are like, oh, they're all threats and big air, and then suddenly they don't do anything. So he actually got there. And, you know, he had a great sense of dramatic style and the dark sarcasm, and he stays pretty calm in a dramatic song as well.
Well, I'm gonna have to read your mermaid one because I'm Ursula. I love Ursula.
She's amazing.
I always tell people she made fat look sexy. I'm sorry.
She's amazing. Actually, my sister cosplayed as Ursula for our Avengers party.
Ooh, nice. I'm doing it next year.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, Ursula, in my Mermaid Bride story, the corollary is the Banshee Queen. So but she's based off of, I ended up taking her with more of the soul-sucking Banshee, gaunt, craterous character. So so she's not Ursula because I can't top Ursula. Ursula's just amazing.
Yeah, you can't. No one can. I mean, I'm not saying no one can. She's amazing.
No, you can't. And then she has that amazing ballad that, you know, we go through, and
she's just sexy.
She is. And if anyone comes up to me and they tell me, oh, I'm a very busy woman, I have to respond, and I haven't got all day.
It's funny that I used to work at Disneyland, and everyone at Disneyland knew that I loved Ursula, so I was always getting the Ursula pins.
Nice.
Like, they were always just buying them for me, and I'm like, are you guys kidding me? I have so many left. I'm like, I love them. I won't ever give them away.
That is pretty cool.
You know, it's my Ursula. So what made you do a reversal story? Your mermaid story is, it's not the normal one people are going to read, basically.
No, it's not. So it actually came about. My sister's favorite Disney movie is The Little Mermaid. And she would ask me to tell her stories when we were little. And she would want the same one retold over and over again. And so I went through each of the perspectives. And I just started thinking, if I was the other woman, I would feel really horrible about this, my role in this. And so I decided I didn't want her to be evil. I wanted her to be a sympathetic character. I wanted her to be a woman who has morals and a heart. And of course, she's drawn to this prince who's washed up on the beach. But what do you do when there's another person who has a claim? And then, of course, because you have the curse that's involved in it. And so I ended up drawing off of the Hans Christian Andersen's story, and then also from the Syrian mermaid story. So there's elements of that in there as well.
Okay. Well,
So,
I was looking at it, and I was looking at the cover, and I was like, you're not going to buy this because you can't buy it right now. You're not going to buy this because you can't buy this right now. But I'll buy it probably tonight and read it. But that's not the point. I thought, like, when I was looking at your stories and your covers and everything, you do a lot of not market, I guess people want to say.
mm-hmm.
So, but oh crap, I might go out because I just dropped my my modem. Oops. But anyways, that is my questions. Electra, are you next?
Well, what about Ishabelle?
Oh, Ish, sorry. Well, Ish doesn't talk.
She might.
Oh, she is. Okay.
I'm going to actually touch on a little of the technical things because that's just my thing. You're obviously highly educated. You're a lawyer. That's a lot of education. That's a ridiculous amount of education for my understanding.
In school a long time.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself writing very stilted because it's in your nature to use the legal kind of talk and speech? So do you ever find sometimes your characters are very stilted and technical?
Mm-hmm. I really struggled with that when I was in law school in particular. That was a total nightmare, particularly when I was trying to write these passionate romantic sections of text and then turn around and write a legal brief where if you use the word burning desire, that person better be on fire and want a hose. And so the one thing that I did discover is because I've had to fight with it so much, it's gotten easier. However, with that said, I still struggle on some days. Some days just aren't as good as others. But I found a really quick way to get out of that is I go and I read prose from a book I love, like something like that, particularly poetry. Quite frankly, because poetry is not really exactly a technical, but it's precise and it's beautiful. And it's crisp and emotional, or it's flowing and it's connecting. So that helps.
Awesome. I was wondering because I know I tend to do that as a historian. I want to give like historical lectures and explain why. It's sometimes like, oh my God, stop that. And my husband, he actually reads a lot of my work. And he's like, they don't need to know the whole history of this ship.
Yep. It's what I have my story Bible for. And yeah, particularly with world building, it's like, well, that just went dry, didn't it?
All right. Do you use betas, editors? I mean, do you depend on them to point out perhaps like when you are stilted, or are you kind of one of those? I know several authors, Amy, that will argue with you tooth and nail.
Mm-hmm.
She does brilliant. But are you very protective of your words?
Well, I would say I do rely on my beta readers and my I rely on my beta readers and my editors. I actually try to have more than one editor go over a piece because I know that sometimes what I'm saying isn't exactly coming through, or I confuse people, and I don't want to do that. But I am protective. However, I trust them. So those people who I show it to, I trust who they are. I know that they're not going to ruin the story. And I may not agree with them at the end of the day, but okay, plead your cause, give me your evidence here, and I'm going to listen to what you have to say. So yeah, without them, I would be in a lot of trouble. My editor, my primary editor, I have one specifically focusing on the Tue-Rah Chronicles, and this poor woman, her name is Mary Yamandi, and she's so kind. She has to go through all 3 million words of this, and then she said, well, do you want to just send me the story Bible? Like, you can have every part of this that you want, whatever you want. And so whenever they give me that feedback, it really helps me to make sure, well, if I didn't get that through, why didn't I get that through? Or am I just wrong here?
All right, well, that was my 2 questions.
I'm next. All right.
Hi,
Electra. Hi. So I actually went a little bit with the my questions to be a little bit kind of more of a, I would say, from the writer's perspective. Mm-hmm. So what do you struggle with in your writing, if you have anything, like?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I feel crushed with my writing. I have so many ideas, so many things I want to write about, and I can't get them all out, or it's not coming out exactly the way I want. And so I struggle with that desire for perfectionism versus recognizing, you're going to rewrite this 20 plus times, so just put the words on the page, woman. And so that's a struggle for me. And then other times, quite frankly, depression is pretty hard. It kicks in with all of the imposter syndrome and this belief of nobody's going to like this except for 10 people out there, and your friends and family will pretend like they like it because they don't want you to be sad. And that can be difficult, and there's no reason for that to show up, but it does. So those are probably my biggest struggles in writing but I enjoy writing all in all.
How do you overcome that depression or that perfectionism? Because I'm one of those where it's like I will delete the same sentence 5 times until I think it is just the perfect sentence, and I wasted 20 minutes writing 1 sentence.
Yeah. Well, I started telling myself I'm not wasting time by striving for perfection, but I set a time limit, and then I have to walk away from it. And I make myself fail each day, which isn't hard to do, but I actually I know I'm going to fail at one point in the day, so I'm just going to do everything I can, like these little steps to get closer to my goal. And marketing is probably the biggest place where I run those risks and can actually do the tangibleness. Whereas with the writing, I have to stop myself after a certain amount of time and say, okay, this is going to sit here and it's going to the editor now. And it's just a struggle, and it's not become easy. So I'm sorry that's probably not encouraging, but it's just saying, no more on that. And then for the depression, I do a lot of, I exercise, drink water, pray, journal, meditate, and sometimes I just let myself feel really down, and I'll ask why and kind of let it wash over and then move away from it and try not to get stuck there.
No, that's really good. I think a lot of authors struggle with that, and they just need to hear somebody else say that they struggle with it too. Can just be encouraging alone. So
it's like a storm.
It is. And then my final question is what is your favorite writing techniques?
Oh, let's see. I have a lot that I enjoy, but I really enjoy writing sprints with people, the writers, everyone gets together. And the hardest part is getting everyone to be quiet, because you get writers together, like we're talking about, characters doing this, or have you heard about that, whatever it might be. But you set a timer, and then everybody writes. And, we do this sometimes on Facebook groups, or I've had a few times when it was in person, and you just get this amazing chemistry as if everyone's creating, and some people are creating really fast and some people are going really slow. But at the end of it, everyone's got a little bit more of the story done. And so there's this beautiful camaraderie that comes together.
Awesome. That's awesome. All right. I think that's it for me.
So you brought up writing sprints, and that is a very big portion of NaNoWriMo, and we are in November. Are you participating in NaNoWriMo?
I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
I've been doing that for years now, so it's a fun tradition.
Yep, me too. So we'll have to connect on the NaNoWriMo.org.
Yes,
So,
I need to actually log into the site.
well, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as has become a tradition with Focus on Fantasy Romance, we do have a giveaway. Why don't you explain your giveaway?
All right, so my giveaway is that you can pick from any of my stories that are on my J.M. Butler author page on Amazon and send me a message. The only one that I would have to exclude from that is the Snow Anthology, and that's because it's been taken down, but some people are still selling some hard copies of it in different places, and I can't afford the $50 to send you a copy of that. So
Right.
if you can pick one that has an e-copy, that would be fantastic.
Right, and we'll actually handle the giveaway. So if you comment on our blog on this post and ask J.M. Butler a question, that will get you an entry into the giveaway. So we'll handle the technical part. We'll leave it open for 30 days. So by December 18-ish, make sure you've made your comment, so you can get to know more about J.M. Butler and a chance to win one of her ebooks. So why don't you tell us where our listeners can find you?
All right. Well, you can find me at my website, which is jmbutlerauthor.com. And then you can also find me on Twitter, but there I use the handle Jessica B. Fry because I have 2 writing names and I didn't consolidate before I started my marketing plan. You can also find me on Facebook. I've got a writer's page for J.M. Butler, and I think it should just be J.M. Butler, yes. So you can look me up there. And then I also have a private readers group. And if you comment on this and ask me for the link, I'll send it to you. But I'm probably not going to send it out all over the place because I've gotten some spammers who wanted to sell things that probably should not have been sold and were not legal, who tried to pop in. So I do have to approve who joins. And it's not because I don't think there's wonderful people out there, but some of them are a little less ethical.
Right. Ray-Bans comes to mind. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Listeners, you're welcome. If you like the podcast, please like, comment, and share. This has been episode number 53. Good night.
Good night.